just in terms of the risks of nuclear weapons, I mean, I think what all this highlights is the fact that these weapons aren't just dangerous if they go off, either by deliberate or accidental nuclear war. They're dangerous to have around anyway. I mean, having submarines floating around the North Atlantic or wherever is an immensely dangerous thing, and we've already seen in the past 2 years that there was a collision between two nuclear-armed submarines, a British and a French one. Fortunately, it doesn't seem that there was a lot of damage done, but it could have been otherwise. We know also about the immense dangers of these nuclear convoys, and they are. I mean, you're absolutely right. They're a sitting target for terrorists. We've got to watch how we publicise that, so that we're not accused of attracting their attention to this kind of thing. But they really are. They're the easiest thing in the world. If fairly chaotic peace campaigners can track these things from their origin at Aldermaston right to where they finish up at the fast lane in Coolport, then and that's not to to be too disrespectful to. Then any well-organised terrorist could do the same sort of thing, and could be sitting on a hillside with an RPG or whatever it is and take watch of that. Immensely dangerous. Even if they don't cause a nuclear explosion, they could cause the dispersal of plutonium across a wide area. Immensely dangerous to have these things around. And all the leaks into the Gairloch, the grounding of the HMS Astute off the coast of Skye recently, all the things that have happened that we very often don't hear about until much later, and obviously John Ensley is the resident expert on that kind of thing, and has worked along with a number of journalists to make sure that we get stories into the papers almost weekly. We're getting stories into the paper, and John really has to be congratulated on the work that he does. Not only obviously the dangers of uranium mining, which kind of where the poor miners are the people who are seriously damaged by this and their health and safety. So it's not just a matter of whether or not these are militarily useless, which they are, and I think there's a growing consensus about that. It's the fact that simply possessing them poses the people of the area, especially the area where they're deployed, at huge risk. And of course, when you think about these convoys going the length and breadth of Britain, any part of Britain could be contaminated as a result of an attack on these convoys, or as a result of accidents, which have happened. I mean, these things have fallen over, they've crashed on a number of occasions. It's not an unusual thing to happen with any normal road traffic accident. So, I think this is quite a big part of what we do, and we maybe need to place more emphasis on it. But I think it's an enormously important issue that we ignore at our time.
Tim, any of the points?
Yes, firstly, thanks to Jim for his clarification on the WCP ruling. With regards to nuclear weapons-free zones, they're a really important precedent in terms of disarmament and non-proliferation. Last year, the African nuclear weapons-free zone came into force, making the whole of the southern hemisphere nuclear weapons-free zone in terms of being covered. So there's like 8 or 9 nuclear weapons-free zones in the world now. And as well as the other disarmament agreements that are established for other types of weapons, like the ban on landmines and chemical weapons and biological weapons, these kind of treaties and agreements, multilateral and international treaties, show that we can produce kind of strong regimes outlawing classes of weapons between countries. And these are the real special relationships between states, not the kind of military alliances that we're often told are so important, for example, between the US, the UK, and other kind of military alliances. The real special relationships are those which build security properly, which are based on human needs. So I really think, nuclear weapons-free zones are very important to look at. In terms of young people, I still kind of class myself as a kind of young person.
We all concede that.
CND are looking at this, and other kind of groups in this kind of movement are because 18 to 30-year-olds are generally the most opposed to nuclear weapons and tried it. So educating young people is really important. I've campaigned in universities against the arms trade for a while about these kind of things. And I think one thing that students like, one way you can really get to them, for example, is by bringing home to them the issues. So, for example, looking at issues of like divestment, of when like universities invest in these companies, we could maybe think about how we can get universities to sell their shares in companies like BAE Systems, who make nuclear submarines. We can, as like campaign against arms trade, are doing, like say, stop arms companies and other kind of military companies recruiting on campus, for example. AWE need a new generation of engineers and scientists. that's part of what the French Anglo deal is about. It's about making sure that the next generation of scientists are really there. So by actually saying, that's not a very good career path for you to do is important, and Scientists for Global Responsibility do kind of alternative ethical kind of reports on this. That's really important. And one other thing to say, I guess, is that at the demo last week where the students were protesting, not rioting, protesting strongly, and the majority of them very non-violently, there were also signs I saw that said scrap Trident, and so I think there is definitely a link there to make, given the potential for drastic and horrible, swinging education cuts. So I think those are kind of ways to connect with the students.
Mike?
I no longer class myself as a young person on the basis
We'll
that
concede that as well.
my definition was always whether I would be young enough to still be a member of the Komsomol, and as that is now passed, I no longer consider myself. I was interested in Bill's point about the nuclear weapons-free zones being something we could develop with young people, because I think it is immensely important. I was in the Dundee Youth CND when I first started getting involved, and it was something that bringing young people together and getting their involvement is so necessary. Just speaking to those teenagers in Moffat about the nuclear weapons convoys, they were very open to what we were saying to them. One of them said that they'd actually thought that Faslane had been closed because of all these protests outside them, and I thought they'd shut that place. But it shows that the job needs to be done. Because, I mean, the memory I have of nuclear-free zones is kind of 25, 30 years ago, when a lot of local authorities just a road sign when you're coming in and a road sign when you're going out saying, sort of welcome to such and such nuclear-free zones. That kind of tokenism we can't afford anymore, and it really is vitally important that we push forward with this, and having young people at the focus of all the stuff we try and do.
Thank you. I think it would be worthwhile if we could think of a slightly different expression to nuclear-free zones for the kind of thing we're thinking about here, as opposed to, the real nuclear-free zone treaties. Mainly because we understand what it means, which is an aspiration to be nuclear-free. But not everyone quite understands how you could, in Scotland, declare Scotland to be a nuclear-free zone, or Dumbartonshire to be a nuclear-free zone. I don't quite know if there's a slight change in the wording that we could produce for that kind of thing, because it's basically, we want to be a nuclear-free zone, and I think we should be giving that a wee bit of thought. Now,
An important point. Unite, when it was the T&G part of Unite, had good policy on Trident. It was the fact that Amicus, obviously an engineering-based union with jobs in that industry, were a bit more picky about where they put their toes in the water. And so now the two unions have come together in the form of Unite. There is a policy battleground to be fought over. The point is about the alternative works is very apposite at the moment, because at the moment Dundee is making a major bid to be a possible centre of construction on the offshore. The East Coast seems to be opening up first as far as big offshore wind turbine construction and maintenance is concerned. But the whole decommissioning of the oil rigs, that hasn't been mentioned as far as I know with the people that are speaking as far as economic development on the East Coast is concerned. So that's an important one to put into the mix. And the point about Greenham, and somebody made the point about why did the UK have so many wonderful sort of bands and stuff in the 80s and stuff, and that's because basically it was a wonderful training environment for them, because they were living off benefits and being able to practice, and this kind of cultural boost that we got from artists as well. So we shouldn't rule some of these things out. Just mentioning Greenham takes me back, because I think when people remember the 93 strike at the Timex factory, there was an 83 occupation of one of the factories in the Timex complex. And as a very young shop steward, I went along to that as part of the GND delegation, and went into this occupied factory, majority of them women engineering workers, and here, standing on a table in the middle of the dining room, addressing the whole of the factory, was Helen John. And I just thought, as a youngster, that was absolutely wonderful, that here's people engaged in a struggle to try and protect their jobs, and making the link and being spoken to about the situation at Bremen. So all those kind of links are wonderful.
Alan?
Yes, just to pick up the issue of alternative defence and renewable energy, because we recently wrote a study for CND, and one of the things that I kind of parts of it that I developed was the issue of Barrow. Barrow is a town of 60,000 people, and kind of on the edge of the Cumbrian Peninsula. It's 30 or 40 miles from the nearest main road. It's a very isolated position. It's already a kind of town with high levels of deprivation and unemployment, and lots of people who are dependent on benefits, and its major employer is BAE Systems Submarines. So in other words, it's the place where our current nuclear submarines and future nuclear submarines are being and will be built, kind of thing. So if we want to see an end to Trident, then how do we overcome the problem that these workers will face in losing the jobs of perhaps up to 5,000 jobs? So that was one of the things that and obviously there are shipbuilding alternatives, which we did, but they're mainly in niche markets, because you have to remember that commercial shipbuilding has collapsed. The market for that has collapsed, and therefore military shipbuilding is largely what still goes on in Britain, unfortunately, and also happens in the Clay as well. So how do we overcome that problem? And one of the things that we come up with, in fact the strongest thing we come up with by far, is the fact that we are now rolling out a programme of offshore wind. Much of that is not being manufactured in Britain, but is being manufactured elsewhere, in places like Denmark and Germany, etc. But that's being rolled out at the present time. But what's next in line within 10 years is the rollout, and it will be on a massive scale, of wave and tidal power technology. Britain, for once, has a lead, and most of the companies that are developing this, in the lead of this, are actually British, many of them Scottish, in fact, companies. So that can we transform Barrow and the shipyards in the Clyde, which may have no future outside military shipbuilding, can we transform them into the sort of places where we can build the turbines which will drive, which will harness the power of the oceans and the sea, which of course Scotland especially has enormously rich resources. That is a real possibility, because we believe that there will be the potential for hundreds of thousands of jobs to be developed, not simply in manufacturing, but also in terms of providing the infrastructure to bring the energy on board, etc., and onshore, etc. So there is enormous potential there for developing and for transforming what is producing weapons of mass destruction and other weapons of war that are used to fight expeditionary wars in other parts of the world, to transform that into something that produces energy from a green source, that reduces our carbon footprint, and that actually helps us to meet our carbon targets as a nation. That's the challenge, I think, and that, I think, is the way in which we have to present that as a challenge that we must take advantage of. And in the next 10 years, that's a real possibility. And that's a way also in which I think we could win over many of the trade unionists who are hesitant about supporting us at the present time, especially in those industries where they feel their members will lose their jobs if Trident doesn't go ahead.